March 5th, 2024. Welcome in, everyone, to GC Live, Talking Tuesdays. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuva. Appreciate you guys tuning in today, as we are just 2 weeks away now from South Carolina beginning spring practices. Yeah, 2 weeks away until the Gamecocks take to the field for practice number 1 of spring ball. And then, of course, the spring game will be taking place in April on April 20th. So as we inch closer, obviously we've talked a lot this offseason, a lot with just changes. Did that last week, did it on Thursday on the walkthrough with Intern Joe. We'll get into it today, though, for those of you who may have missed the walkthrough on Sunday, or maybe you're just a Tuesday listener. That's all right. We'll get into some of the comments that Mike Furry had to make during his introductory press conference last Friday. And I'll tell you what, it's real easy to say this, that just listening to the guy, like, man, you know, like you can be excited about him, but I just think he's going to be a better fit. I think he's going to be a better fit than what James Coley would have been. Certainly from a resume standpoint, Coley has been coaching football a hell of a lot longer. I know Furry obviously has not just coached, he's played in the NFL, he's coached in the NFL. But if you want to say from resume standpoint that Coley is just, you know, he's got a better resume, I get that part. But having said that, I also think, though, there's something to be said about what Furry's going to be able to bring to this program and what South Carolina needs. Before we get into that, though, it was announced today that South Carolina's annual Pro Day will take place next Tuesday. So we got some football going on, not just next Tuesday, but, of course, the following Tuesday as well, with spring football starting up. And there'll be 15 former Gamecocks taking to the field. Now, we're going to get into this past weekend in a little bit and what took place this past week as a whole at the NFL Combine, because there's 5 Gamecocks there. But those 5 players, Spencer Rattler, Trey Knox, Nick Gargiulo, Marcellus Dial, and Xavier Luedecke, those 5 are expected to take part in Pro Day coming up next Tuesday. In addition to that, you're going to have 10 other Gamecocks that are also expected to take part. And the interesting thing about this is you're going to have some names from guys that maybe you haven't heard of in the last couple of years because they have not played with the program. They didn't play with the program this past year. One of those players, according to the press release from South Carolina, former defensive tackle Jabari Ellis will be taking part in this event on Tuesday next week. In addition to that, Marion Brown, D'Angelo Gibbs, Tyreek Johnson, Takarion Joyner, Eddie Lewis, Dante Turbo Miller, Tyrese Ross, Jordan Strawn, and DJ Twitty are set to take part in Pro Day as well. Just your overall thoughts, Joe, from some of the players that I mentioned. We obviously know the other 5. Of the 10 players I mentioned right there, though, the 5, obviously not including the ones that were at the Combine.
Yeah.
In Indy. Which player are you most excited to watch next Tuesday? And how excited are you to see what they're able to do and think maybe they have an opportunity to play at that next level?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Outside of the 5 guys that you mentioned, I think obviously all 5 of those guys have a chance to go play in the NFL, and they will. But I'm interested to see AB, how he works out. You know, guy that has a lot of speed on the edge. So if AB has a good workout in his Pro Day, you know, I could see him getting an unrestricted free agent deal or climbing up draft boards too. So we'll see where they be. And then Jordan Strawn was another one, Mike, that I had in mind. Another guy with some length. His size and frame is just NFL, just screams the NFL. So if he can put together a pretty good Pro Day, I could see him winding up on some draft boards as well.
Yeah, certainly when you think of what Jordan Strawn went through and what he was doing at Georgia State before he transferred over to South Carolina a couple of years ago, goes through the knee injury, sets him back after waiting a whole year. I mean, that's what he did. He was behind JJ and Mbare. He was behind Aaron Sterling. He was behind some studs that first year here.
Yeah.
And we did see him do some good things that first season at South Carolina, but unfortunately for him, he was just behind some really good players. Well, he put the work in, came back the following season, and unfortunately suffered that knee injury that cut his season short. What he was able to do this year, I think it shows a lot of what he's capable of doing. But as we've mentioned many times in this program before, when you come back from a knee injury, when you come back from a lower body injury, the biggest challenge is the mental hurdles that you have to overcome, especially in that first year. So to me, if I'm an NFL scout, and we've talked about this with Field Yates, who came on our program a couple of weeks back, a couple months ago. I mean, everything just blends together. But he was talking about Xavier Legette and talking about how you have to not get so caught up with the statistics of what a player does from a college standpoint. Obviously, it's nice that, okay, hey, this guy can go out there and he can ball out. He's proven himself, but it's about a projection, right? Projecting what a player can do at the next level. So obviously, size, speed, we saw it this past weekend. We'll get into it a little bit more with Xavier Legette and what he was able to do at the combine. But I bring that up as an example because the same can be true about a player coming back from an injury. Now, obviously, there's going to be more red flags surrounding players that come back from injuries. But the whole point being is you have a guy like Jordan Strong that came back, was able to prove, okay, hey, I can still play at a very high level. And I just did that in a year in which I was still overcoming those mental hurdles. I don't know exactly where Strong will go. I think the injury part of it, I mean, it sucks because certainly when you look at where he could have been drafted a year ago, if he doesn't get hurt, has the type of season that a lot of us expected him to have back in 2022, would have probably been a good high draft pick in 2023. That wasn't the case, though. So whether he gets drafted late, or he just has an opportunity to sign on with the team, I think regardless, a team's going to get a steal with him. So I think out of all the players, Joe, I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah.
I think that's the most intriguing one. I think that's the one that's most intriguing to me. Now, having said all that, you look at some other players that are going to be taking part in this event next Tuesday. DeCarrion Joyner, we've talked about it, how he's really been the Mr. Do-It-All guy. I mean, all it takes is one team to really fall in love with you. I mean, that's all it takes.
There's 32 of them.
And you look at what Taysom Hill's been able to do with the Saints.
Yep.
And that's what really stands out to me. And I don't want to say, okay, DeCarrion Joyner's skill set compared to, but the point being is, it's not crazy to believe that a team might look at DK and say, you know what, man, this guy can do a little bit of everything. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what he can do in addition to, obviously, Jordan Strong. Another player, too, that I would mention, I mean, I know you mentioned AB. AB is a good one. I'm interested to see what Eddie Lewis can do. And the reason why is because with Eddie, we just didn't see him have the type of season that we thought he was going to do, speed standpoint, right? Using that speed on the field as a returner, as a wide receiver. So you have a guy that has a lot of talent, and he's proven it at other stops along the way. If he's able to go out there and test well, that's another player that could at least get an opportunity to be invited to a mini camp and then just go from there. Get invited to training camp and, let the chips fall where they may. And sometimes when you go, and this is kind of just making assumptions here, but if a player like Eddie Lewis or any of these guys, they go undrafted, sometimes that's a blessing. That's a blessing in disguise compared to being drafted later on in the rounds, because at that point, if a team wants to bring you on, multiple teams want to bring you on, you can play the numbers game. All right, the Panthers have, 6 wide receivers. Okay, the Bengals have 9. Why am I going to go to that situation if I feel like there's a better opportunity for me to make a team from a numbers game standpoint?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's another player to keep an eye on simply because he does have the speed, and I think he's a player that's going to test very well at Pro Week.
Yeah, he's a guy that came into South Carolina with elite speed out of Memphis, right? His ability to play in the slot was one of the main reasons they recruited him, and then also, he showed a lot at Memphis in the punt return game, right? Elite speed out of Eddie Lewis. So I think that's why, South Carolina fans expected a little bit more out of him. It was hard, especially in that receiver room, to really find your groove when you have that many guys, competing. And for some reason, it just didn't play out for Eddie at South Carolina. But Mike, I firmly agree with that take. I think, he's going to test really, really well. Again, a guy with really, really quick feet. So that's another guy. And then it'll be interesting to see what, Dante Miller can bring as well. Another guy that, we haven't heard a lot about recently. But he was recruited to South Carolina because of his size, because of his frame coming out of Columbia. He's the size of an SEC back, and again, didn't have the best of chances in a room with CBS and Marshawn Lloyd. But again, it'll be interesting to see what we see out of those guys.
And I haven't had a chance to. I'm going to reach out to him probably when we get off the show, but I haven't talked with Jabari Ellis. Thought that was an interesting name just to see. I was not expecting Jabari Ellis, a guy who did some good things in the Canadian Football League 2 years ago. And I was hoping that he was going to get an opportunity to be able to play off of what he was able to do with the Montreal Alouettes towards the end of the season, because he was a late signee 2 years ago. And then prior to the start of this season, unfortunately, he was waived. But, for those of you that don't follow Canadian Football League, there's restrictions on how many American players you can have. So that also plays a factor, never mind the challenges that you face when it comes to we have only X amount of spots on our roster. You have this many players at that position. This is how many we're going to keep at this position. You also have the challenges that you're facing when you're an American player, simply because they only let you have X amount of American players on the roster. Mm-hmm. Having said all that, though, I'm going to be interested to talk with Jabari, and maybe we'll have Jabari on the show later on this week. We'll see what his schedule is. Was not expecting to see him on that list, though, but Jabari, excited to see him back in there. Absolutely. On Tuesday. All right, having said all that, Joe, let's go back to the week that was at the NFL Combine. Couple headlines that stood out. What Spencer was able to do from a throwing standpoint, I thought he looked really good. In addition to that, I thought what Xavier Leggett did, obviously running the 40 as quickly as he did, that certainly stole the show. Yeah. Going to have some numbers here for you guys. If you haven't seen it already, you want to be able to see the complete recap from this past weekend at the NFL Combine, head on over to Gamecock Central and look for a recap, Gamecocks at the NFL Combine. You can see how all 5 guys performed, as well as their height and weight, arm measurements, hand size, all that fun stuff, as well as comments and videos from reporters who were there, as well as former NFL players as well. But looking at Xavier Leggett's numbers, 4.39 40. Now, the only reason why it's not going to get talked about as much in comparison to some of the other wide receivers, because I think that was tied for the 7th fastest 40 time at the Combine by receivers.
Yeah.
It's because there were guys friggin' running 4.22s, 4.21s, setting records here. And records as far as Combine records. I mean, I saw some of these jabronis talking about, Usain Bolt and track. I mean, you can't compare the two. Can't compare the two. But talking about NFL Combine numbers, the impressive part about Leggett, Joe, and we already know this.
Yeah.
Is the fact that he's doing that at that size. At that size, 221 pounds is what Leggett weighed in at the Combine. And in addition to that, if you're just curious about what his height was 6'1", arms 31 and 7/8, hand 9 inches, 4.39 40. Vertical jump, that was another thing that he really shined at, 40 inches. So
yeah.
A lot of things that he did. He didn't take part in the bench press, 20-yard shuttle, 3-cone drill. I'll be interested to see if he decides to do that at Pro Day. We know that he was a little banged up over the last month or so going back to the Senior Bowl. Maybe he just wants to be able to do it at South Carolina, and some players opt to do that. Not that I'm really too concerned about how many times you can throw up 225 on the bench press. I really don't care unless you're a linebacker or more so a defensive end, D-tackle, offensive lineman. But I think Xavier Leggett, he stole the show as far as the 5 Gamecocks this past weekend. If I had to rate them as far as who helped themselves out the most, I'd probably put Leggett first, Rattler second. I really like what Nick Gargiulo did as well. Marcellus Style, and then Trey Knox. And that's not a knock on Knox. Again, you have to pick 5. That's the way I would rate him. I still think Knox will be a guy that'll have an opportunity to get drafted late.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I mean, I was also very impressed with Xavier Leggett's combine. You know, that was one thing. The speed was one thing. Obviously, you could see it on tape, but to be able to test it too was big. And a guy with so much size, right? You know, he's the NFL prototypical receiver, right? And just kind of the way the game is nowadays. XL's climbing up draft boards, and we know, and we kind of knew this. We talked about this after the Senior Bowl. And it's not getting as much talk because it was already established. But Spencer Rattler, obviously, good things. Haven't heard any bad things come out of the meetings yet. And we kind of knew that. We talked about this leading up to it. But all good things out of the meetings and everything from Spencer from a character perspective. We knew this already, but I did just want to bring it up out of the combine. It was the same, more of the same. But yeah, no, XL tested really well. Gargiulo did some good things as well. So really good stuff out of the Gamecocks at the combine, Mike.
So this is a comment that I want to share. I'll zoom in on it for those of you that may be watching on your televisions. Zoom in just a little bit for you. Kirk Benkirk, he's a former NFL quarterback. This is what he had to say about Spencer's performance at the Combine this past weekend. Said, scouts and coaches will see Spencer Rattler's throwing performance at the Combine and be really impressed. His tempo and timing plus accuracy was really good. So often you see guys speed up and slow down their feet to gauge wide receivers they've never thrown to before. Rattler was dropping back and altering the throw trajectory instead of his feet tempo, and that's not something you see many guys do, especially that young. That's actually translates to practice to games. It really stood out to me. So a couple things that stand out to me about Kurt's observations. That was one thing that we talked about last week, Joe. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing in particular, if you've paid attention to the NFL Combine over the last couple of years, a lot of quarterbacks, especially, I mean, the higher projected quarterbacks do this, but even guys sometimes towards the end, guys that aren't projected to go day 1 or even day 2, some of them decide not to throw because they want to throw to their own guys. They want to be able to have that timing there. And I understand that. But at the same time, too, especially in the case of Spencer Rattler, you had nothing to lose, as we talked about last week. And I loved this decision. I know we talked about this last week. I loved the decision by his camp to decide to go out there and throw. And as you see right here, from what Kirk said, going back to some of the things that we saw from Rattler, throwing to guys who he's never thrown to before, the majority of them, right? He was still able to go out there and do some impressive things. And if anything, to me, if I'm a scout, if I'm a GM, if I'm a coach, and I'm seeing this, it should excite me even more about Rattler simply because he's able to do that, not having the opportunity to really work with these guys. And obviously, it's more so about, okay, where's the ball going? Where is he placing it from a spot standpoint? Because naturally, yeah, there's going to be some throws that will be off a little bit from a timing standpoint when you throw to guys that aren't your wide receivers or guys you haven't really had a chance to work with at all. But at the same time, too, what he was able to do this past weekend, he was able to show how damn good he is, how damn good we know he is. He was able to continue to carry that momentum that he created in Mobile, Alabama a couple weeks ago at the Senior Bowl. And he was able to go out there more than anything and just prove, hey, just imagine what I can do if you bring me in and I actually have a chance to work with the wide receivers for your team. What do you think's going to happen? I'm going to be able to be even crisper because I'm going to have that rapport with him. So again, with Rattler, what he did, I've been saying this now for the last couple weeks. I still think he's a guy that can go late second round, third round. I
Yeah,
think he's a day 2 guy.
I'm
I
on
wouldn't
that
be
day 2 wave.
I wouldn't be shocked if he falls into an early day 3 guy. And I know some Gamecock fans don't want to hear that. It just comes down to, at that point, what teams need and what teams are looking for at that point, right?
Yep.
I mean, but a team could be looking for a quarterback at that point. It all depends who has those draft picks. So that's why I said he could slide a little bit just based on team needs at that point. But based on what he's done this offseason, never mind what he did in the season, how can't you like what you've seen from Spencer
Yeah.
Rattler, especially if you're a team out there that maybe you had you were a little reserved with them. You were, all right, you know what? Let's just wait and see. Not really, but now you've been able to see what he's been able to do over the last couple months. He's handled everything as well as any quarterback could have hoped things to go for them.
Yeah, Mike. And we've known since he's been at South Carolina from the day that he showed up to summer practice, right, and was throwing and just, I mean, pads, right? No, like I think it was a helmet and shorts, right? We saw from that jump, everyone was kind of looking at each other like, damn, man, like this kid, like it's real, like all of the hype is real, and he looked so good throwing in shorts and like just he could place the football wherever he wanted. He's a natural born thrower of the football. So what Ben Kurt was saying about altering the trajectory, he knows exactly where it's going at all
Yep.
times, right? So that's a big thing. And then
And where
also
does
to
that
be
go
able,
back, Joe? Where
yeah,
does that go back? That goes back to having the opportunity to work with Dal Loggins
exactly.
for a year. And he mentioned at the combine. He mentioned how big it was
Hmm.
to be able to work with Dal.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and again, it's showing off that we talk about all the time, Shane, and this NFL experience on the staff and getting coaches with NFL experience. This is what happens when you do that, right? Spencer goes to the combine prepared. Xavier Legette goes to the combine prepared, and these guys are going to be high draft picks, right, Mike? I know you said
Yeah.
late second round. I'm thinking a little bit more third, fourth round, but and maybe at the very latest a fifth round pick. But Spencer Rattler is going to get drafted, and he's going to get drafted. He's not going to be drafted in the last round, that's for sure. So impressing on all fronts, and again, we knew he was a natural born thrower of the football and all that stuff, and obviously what kind of a man he is showing through too. So and he's not getting as much talk because it's a quarterback heavy class. It's that's just the nature of
Yeah.
it. More
It's a
guys are
it's
going
a
into the
deep
draft with more
quarterback
hype.
class, deep wide receiver class, and
Yeah,
a deep offensive line class. So when you look at
absolutely.
those three things, and you have a guy that won the Heisman Trophy coming out in Caleb Williams.
Yep.
Obviously, ironically, they worked together when they were
Yeah.
teammates
Oddly
in
enough.
Oklahoma.
Hmm.
But it's the fact that you have a Heisman guy coming out. You have a guy like Drake May, who going into the season, people were talking about being on a short list to win the Heisman. So never mind the fact that you have guys that actually won the
Hmm.
Heisman again this year, right? Jaden Daniels.
Yep.
Look at a guy like Michael Penix, who was in the mix to be able to win the Heisman this year. So naturally, from a national media standpoint, Rattler is not going to get the same recognition as those guys. But honestly, that's all
Well,
right.
and Mike, yeah, it's the NFL, right? These guys leave no stone unturned, right? They
Nope.
they know who Spencer Rattler is, and they know what kind of man he is. Some team is ready to pick him and ready to fill a need for a potential future starting quarterback. Like it's the NFL. They
I'll tell
they
you
they get
what.
paid way too much to not to miss a guy like Spencer Rattler. You know,
There's definitely at least one, but I wouldn't be shocked if there's a couple teams right now
absolutely.
that are looking at what's taking place with Rattler going back to Mobile, Alabama during the Senior Bowl, what he did this past week at the Combine, and thinking, you know what, man, we have a steal. We have a steal. Like he's not getting talked about nearly the same in comparison to some of these other quarterbacks. Even a guy like Bo Nix is getting more recognition, it feels like, from a national media
Right.
standpoint than Rattler. And I guarantee you there, again, it's probably at least one team, if not more, that are looking at this saying, perfect, this is great. I like the fact that Rattler is not being talked about because I feel like he's going to start to drop and he can fall right into our laps,
Yeah.
regardless of what that round is. I mean, it happens every year. I mean, we've seen this. I mean, shoot, I'm going back and I'm watching The Dynasty on Apple TV, the 10-part docu-series on the Patriots. And it's incredible to see some of the guys that they were able to draft over the years during that 20-plus year run with Belichick there. And I just bring that up as an example because I don't want to sit here and be like, all right, Rattler will be like, 6th round pick 199 like break. No. But the point being is these guys, they drop down a little bit later. That's all right. I mean, obviously you would like to be drafted a little bit higher because there's a little bit more money there on the front end of things. But at the same time, too, those contracts, 3 years, if you're fortunate to stick around in the NFL, which the average lifespan in the NFL is 2.5 years. But if you're able to stick around for that after that third season, and a lot of these contracts, those rookie deals, they have an option on that fourth year. You want to be able to get to that second contract. You're able to get to that second contract, you're going to be in a better situation where you can take care of your family for the rest of your life instead of, going through that first contract. So again, it comes down to being in a situation where a team really loves you and all it takes is one. Looking at some of these other comments real quick, I don't know if some of these get off track a little bit, but Zachary, okay, this is perfect. I didn't even see the full question. Says, hey, Mike, with Russell Wilson being released, or he's going to be released in the next couple of days, just to make sure we clarify that. Not to be a wise guy about it, but, it'll be done in the next couple of days when the NFL calendar starts up. And Spencer Rattler meeting with the Broncos. I believe the Broncos ask about Rattler during the season. Yeah, I think. And the other thing too about that is you have Nate Atkins out there.
Oh, yeah.
You have Nate Atkins already there. So I bring that up because when you go through this process, and it's not like the Broncos are the only one. We could do this with multiple teams here. But the thing about the Broncos is you have a guy like Nate Atkins who the franchise loves, and he comes from a football family. He comes from a family with Greg Atkins having spent time not just coaching in college, but coaching in the pros. So if there is any inclination of wanting to bring in a guy like Spencer Rattler, there's no doubt in my mind that the Broncos wouldn't say something to Nate and be like, hey, what can you tell us about Spencer? That doesn't mean they're like, hey, do you think we should draft him? Obviously, Nate Atkins doesn't have the say with that. But especially in this era that we live in now with the draft. I mean, again, going back to the dynasty, teams are doing more and more research on players now more than ever before to make sure that there's not any character issues. I'm not saying that there is with Rattler, as we all know here in Columbia, South Carolina, from how he handled himself over the last 2 years. But whether it be character, whether it be leadership, whatever the case may be, if they go to Nate, I mean, Nate's going to give him the honest truth. And Nate is a guy that doesn't need to make up anything about Rattler. I mean, we know how talented he is and what he's capable of bringing. So, yeah, I mean, the Broncos, because of how things have played out with moving on from Russ, are going to be moving on from Russ in the next couple of days. Yeah, it's another team I would say to keep an eye on. And the thing about that, too, is that could be one of those picks later on, right? That could be a 3rd round pick. That could be a late 2nd round pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, and I mean, Mike, that happens across the NFL nowadays, right? I mean, I can remember stories of Jerry Jones asking his grandson at Texas about a player. I forget who it was, but yeah, happens a lot. And a lot of times, obviously, if the review is good, and they trust their guy in house, they'll probably pick the player, right? So good reviews go a long way, and we know that obviously in football. And Mike, you brought up the second contract. That was something Coach Furry talked about. I know we're going to talk about him here in a second as well, but just getting guys to that second contract was one thing, and I know we talked about it a little bit ago, but stood out to me for sure because that's what you're trying to do when you have all of this NFL talent or experience on your coaching staff, right? You're preparing guys to not only make it to the NFL but get to that second contract.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what you mentioned with Jerry Jones, he was talking with his grandson, Paxton Anderson, this past draft about DeMarvion Overshone, I think is how you say it,
Yeah.
at Texas. So just to be able to piggyback off that. Hopefully I said the name right.
Yes.
Can't believe I remember that name. All right. Having said that, though, let's continue to move along here. Big Red, does this performance, along with his pro day, have the possibility to boost his draft status? I mean, it can only help Big Red, right? It can only help. I don't think Rattler, and I don't know this for certain, I would assume Rattler would be throwing unless they feel like, hey, they've done everything that they've needed to do at the NFL Combine. But I would assume Rattler will throw at Pro Day because he's going to have his guys there. He's going to, and the other thing too is, and this is just another part of it, Rattler, to me, even if he was pleased and his camp's pleased with how he did the Combine, Rattler might say, you know what, screw it. I'm going out there because I want to help my guys. I want to be able to help their status because no disrespect to Perry Orth. Perry Orth's been brought in the last couple of years. I mean, poor Perry just had a kid. I'm going to give Perry some crap right now. Poor Perry. I mean, I don't know how much more the arm can sling it like it used to, but Perry's been coming in throwing at Pro Day the last couple of years for South Carolina. I would assume that Rattler would want to go out there and throw it because he can help his guys out. And that's something that I think Jaden Daniels mentioned.
Yep.
I wasn't fully buying it from his camp. I believe it was Jaden Daniels. May have been a different quarterback, but I think it was Daniels who said he wasn't going to throw at the Combine because he wants to help his teammates out. It's like, well, buddy, you can do both. I understand that was probably your agent or your PR team putting that together, which is not a bad thing to push out. I mean, it sounds good, but yeah, I mean, I expect Rattler to throw out there, and you know what he does really from a testing standpoint. There's no need to really do anything else. I mean, what Rattler did, taking a look at some of the times, the 40 he ran a 4.95. I mean, from a quarterback standpoint, it was one of the slower 40s, but at the same time, too, I mean, is anyone drafting Rattler because of his wheels? Not to say that he can't move. I'm not saying that like he's like Tom Brady as far as, you know, no mobility. He can move around a little bit, but to me, people aren't drafting Rattler because of his 40 time. You know, hypothetically, just for the sake of conversation, if Rattler were to go out there, and obviously this wouldn't be the case, if Rattler were to go out there and run like a 4.6 at Pro Day next week, does that mean his stock's going to go through the roof? No, he's a quarterback. He's a quarterback, and they understand the skill sets that he has, what he brings to the table. He's not a Lamar Jackson. He's not going to go out there and beat you with his feet. He wants to be able to extend plays with his feet. That's one thing that he talked about at the Combine this past week, and obviously with what we were able to see from Rattler this past season, he was able to do some good things. He was able to extend plays. I believe from a rushing standpoint, he was able to let's see, improved his rushing yards by more than double from his first season in South Carolina, had 4 touchdowns as well. So I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but I expect him to throw out there, and watch him now not throw because I said all that.
Yeah, I mean, short answer, yeah, big red, it always helps. And then long answer, I think, well, you know, whatever team is going to draft him or wants to draft him has, you know, in their mind that they're going to, as a matter of when. It just depends on when, you know, they have to jump up and take him, right? So
yeah, so that's one player in particular I think to pay very close attention to. Michael Lynn added on to it too, that Rattler in the Broncos, and that was one team that was talked about a lot at the Combine. And that's not to say that other teams won't be talking to Rattler, but certainly one to be paying close attention to. In addition to that, before we turn our attention to Mike Furry, because I do want to continue to just finish up talking about some of the guys that we saw at the Combine this past week. Nick Gargiulo, I really liked what he was able to do, the way he moved around, the way he looked in some of the drills. We've talked about it before with Gargiulo. He's a guy that can play multiple spots on the offensive line. He's a guy that was asked to do a lot last year because of injuries for South Carolina. He's the type of player that I think a lot of teams are going to want to bring into their program because he has the ability to do so much. He has the ability to be versatile where you can bring him in and essentially you're getting 3 players. Now, he is in the draft as a center, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have the ability to play other positions. I did think one thing that was interesting with Gargiulo is they have the metrics on how a guy performed at the combine, and they try to go back over the last couple years and how a guy looked. And these numbers would need to be updated because it didn't have his bench press in, because when we did the story yesterday, the offensive line slash place kickers slash specialists had not done bench press yet. So add in the fact that he put up 28 on the bench. But Gargiulo, as far as from a testing standpoint, extremely high, from 1987 to 2024, based on his score. When you get all the metrics together, he actually placed 73rd out of 579 centers. So again, that does not take into account what he was able to do on the bench press. If I can get an updated number for you guys, I will. But I just found that to be interesting because obviously there's been a lot of people that were very, very against Gargiulo for one reason or another, or didn't feel like he brought as much to the table as he really did. And I just thought that was silly. And to be able to see what he did this past weekend, I think it further proves how good of a player he is and why NFL teams are taking a liking to him. In addition to that, Joe, one other name or two other names we will mention. Trey Knox, Marcellus Dial. I thought Marcellus did some good things from a testing standpoint. I thought he moved around well. I think the challenging part for Marcellus is there's a lot of talented corners. There's a lot of talented corners. And I think the big thing with Marcellus is where is he as far as we get to the 6th round, 7th round, because that's where I would expect him to go if he is drafted. Where is he in comparison to the other cornerbacks that are left? So I think he's a guy that, because of his length, he's very lengthy with his arms. We saw that at South Carolina. He also has the ability to play nickel, which helps. Talking about versatility with Nick Gargiulo. I think when we talk about a guy like Marcellus Dial, he could be a guy that could go undrafted, but at the same time, too, I think he's someone that has proven that he can bring a lot to the table. So that was my takeaway on Marcellus Dial.
Yeah.
Trey Knox, it wasn't that Knox had a bad combine by any means. So when I stacked them all and I put the 5, that's, I based on who I felt like helped their cause the most. I think the 3 in particular that I mentioned, Luedecke, Rattler, Gargiulo, I think those speak for itself. And Dial, again, tested very well. But I think with Knox, I think what teams are really going to like with him is he really fits the mold of what we have grown accustomed to seeing with hybrid tight ends.
Yeah.
And I say hybrid tight ends, I mean, essentially the majority of the tight ends in the league, it feels like they're hybrid guys. They're guys that can play detached more, right? They can play close to the line. He can block. His size, I think, is one of those things that isn't necessarily – it's not going to help him, but because he's not like your prototypical tight end. when you look at some of the guys. I mean, 6'3", 240. But again, he doesn't have to be the 6'5", 6'6" tight end because he's able to do a little bit more from a pass catching standpoint. Obviously, that goes back to the fact that he was a guy that played wide receiver earlier in his college career. So to me, it's not that not, and I still think Knox will be drafted.
Yeah.
I still think Knox will be drafted. I mean, if you want to give me, okay, hey, Mike, what guys do you think will get drafted first? Go down the list of those 5. I think Knox will get drafted ahead of Marcellus Dial. But I think it just comes down to the fact that, these other guys, they tested better. They looked better out there.
Oh yeah, and I mean Dial's certainly going to get picked again. But Trey Knox, another guy. I mean, I've said it like 5 times to show already. But all these guys going to the pro day. Knox is another, one of them that has the NFL frame, right? NFL style body and playing type, right? So I think his game has potential to translate really well. He had some injury questions, which is bogging down his draft stock a little bit, but. If Trey Knox gets in the right system, you could see him playing quite a bit on Sundays, right? Just needs to get in the right system, stay healthy, and you should be seeing a lot of them, right? And yet continuing the pathway of Gamecocks in the NFL.
Couple questions. Big Red's got 2. Big Red's first question: could good combine numbers bring eyes to the university via that player participating in their pro day? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I would say more so. There's 2 ways to look at this. First off, more so at the NFL Combine if a player tests out well, simply because there's more eyeballs on the NFL Combine than there are naturally at pro days. Now, I remember in 2016 when I was working in Mississippi, I was covering Ole Miss's pro day, and that's when they had 3 projected first-round draft picks. They had Laramie Tonsil. Obviously, we know what happened with that, with just the mask and everything, the bong, and him just falling down. That was something. But going back to pro day, you had him, you had Robert Condici, and then you also had Laquan Treadwell. And I bring that up because there were so many talented players in that draft class for Ole Miss that you had additional coverage. And we see this sometimes with the SEC network. They'll go out. We've seen it sometimes. They'll go to Alabama or Georgia. Again, 2016, they were at Ole Miss. And, sometimes they go to multiple places because these pro days don't necessarily fall on the same day of each other. So I bring that up just because, yes, it is possible to still be able to have guys ball out at pro day and you get some, recognition. Yeah. But I think a couple things need to happen, right? You need to be able to have the exposure already there. You need to have ESPN, SEC Network already there. Or you need to have guys just put up absolutely stupid numbers to a point where it's going to have to get talked about. It's just going to have to get talked about. So that's why I think it's more of it gets done from a combine standpoint, being out in Indy, because there's more attention there, more national coverage, right? But I think it is still possible to be able to get that recognition from a pro day, but it's just a little bit trickier. You need a couple things to fall your way. So, look, I think what South Carolina has done, even going back to the Muschamp days, you look at the amount of players that have been drafted by South Carolina and the guys that maybe weren't drafted, but some of the guys that were signed as undrafted free agents, they've been able to produce a lot of guys over the last couple of years in the NFL. And not just guys that are sitting there with their helmet in their hand on the sideline. No, I mean, you look at what Ernest Jones did his rookie year and the big role that he played in the Rams being able to win that Super Bowl a couple years ago. By the way, Joe DeCamillis, the new special teams coordinator, was on that staff. What does Jones do this past season? Well, he sets a new franchise record for the Rams. I mean, we could go back even further if you want to go back to the Spurrier days. I mean, it's crazy to think a guy like Jadeveon Clowney now is one of the older players in the league. But, just the point being is South Carolina, the last couple of years. Let's keep it the last couple of years. They've done a really good job, though, being able to produce players to that next level.
JC Horn.
JC Horn.
Cam Smith's on the come up, too.
So I bring that up because what I'm going to be interested in seeing, especially now that we get to this point, we were entering the 4th year of the Shane Beamer era. A lot of those players were either recruited out of high school by Beamer to play at South Carolina, not Oklahoma, right? Boogie Huntley sneaks in there as that one. But you have a lot of guys now who were recruited by Beamer and this staff, or they came in via the transfer portal. So now we're starting to see the switch a little bit as far as guys that are playing in the league, going from South Carolina to the NFL. And I know there's even more if you really want to get down to it, guys that transferred out. Some of those guys were Muschamp players. But I think it's just interesting, Joe, because we've talked about before with the number of coaches on this staff who have either played in the NFL or have coached in the NFL. The NFL experience, being able to sell that, being able to really pitch the idea of development. It's massive. It is absolutely massive. So when we talk about guys that are getting ready for pro day or guys that took part in the NFL Combine last week, 5 guys this past week, 5 guys the year before for South Carolina. You think about these things, and I think you think about the new addition to South Carolina's coaching staff with Mike Furry and some of the things that he had to say this past week. Now, these are some things that Furry said as far as what you can expect from his wide receiver room as far as what he's going to bring to the table. So there's a lot of good things that he said, but this is one thing in particular that stood out to me. So let's take a listen to what Mike Furry had to say.
Well, I think it's there's 3 things that I've built myself, and I think it's what's called a method, and I've carried this with me my whole entire life. And the first thing of that method, to me, if you can create the method, that creates success, right? And I think the first thing that it's guaranteed is effort. I think when you go out there and you watch us run around, it's not going to be shy of effort. It's not going to be shy of exhausting ourselves for a better purpose, and that's our team. And we'll practice like that. We'll play like that. We'll run routes like that. There will always be a purpose, but it's going to be a maximum effort that's going to be behind that. And that's in everything that we do. Again, going back to the question about development, some of the greatest ones I've ever been around, they give max effort and walkthroughs. Right now, I know the tone of things, and I know how you slow stuff down, and I know how to go crazy on things. But when you have maximum effort, when you give effort, that means it's important. Right? That you're telling somebody it's important to you. And so you're trying to make sure that you can maximize that. And so I'll talk to our guys all the time about giving 110%, right? More than the normal, become rare. Right. And then goal oriented. Okay. And I call that level up. We'll talk about leveling up every day. I talk to our guys about just making sure that we have goals that we want to reach, goals for now, goals for the team, individual goals, and how do we get there? And to me, when you become goal-oriented, well, then that's going to make sure you're locked in on your goal, which to me now becomes your discipline. Your discipline in your route running, your discipline in your studies, your discipline in your academics, your discipline anytime that whatever it is, anytime that we take the field. And again, I think through all those things, what evolves then is a great teammate. And I think when you become a great teammate, then you become a great group. And when you become a great group, now you become pretty lethal. And I think all those things hit really well. They're very self-explanatory. They're easy to manage every single day, but I just don't think you live any different. And I think if you do live any different, then I think you're wasting what the good Lord's blessed you with. And if you're going to waste that, then I'm going to get after you. And like Coach Beamer said, just like coaching, if that's not for you and this isn't for you, and if this is not how you want to live and this is not how you want to pursue the best that you can become for your team, well, this might not be the best place, right? But that's how you got to find out. Rather than putting hope out on the field, you're going to put a product, and that product's going to be daggone stinking good, and they're going to freaking run around like a bunch of banshees and play ball.
So I want to pause that real quick before we get into his next comment that he made, and that was talking about the jump up from Division II and not just making the jump from Division II up to Division I, but being a head coach and what coaching at Limestone taught him. I think when you listen to Furry, and we mentioned this before, right at the top of the show, I don't believe, especially when it comes to an assistant coach, but even a head coach, I don't believe in winning the press conference. I think that stuff is the biggest load of crap because anyone can sound good in front of a camera as far as being able to sell, right? I mean, shoot, you can get a lot of used car salesmen, especially when it comes to college football today. But there's something to be said about when you can feel what a person is saying. And that might sound dumb to some, but I can tell you from my days of being recruited to covering this sport for as long as I've done it, that it's real easy when you can tell when someone's BSing someone. This is a guy that is going to sell that vision of playing at that next level. And who better to learn from than a guy that actually did it? A guy that played in the NFL for 8 years. A guy that had 98 reception with the Lions, led the NFC in 2006 in receptions. A guy that spent several years coaching wide receivers in the NFL with the Chicago Bears. A guy that has been a head coach for 4 years combined during two-year stints at Limestone. Guy that has spent time coaching at Marshall and then also at an NAIA school as a head coach. This guy has seen it all. So I think, if anything, he understands and appreciates the journey because he had to go through it. And I think being able to show that to his players as far as, hey, look, I get what you're going through. I understand because I've done it and I've seen it on nearly every damn level. If you want to play at the next level, then this is how you got to do things. Being able to sell that development part to me, and Joe, we've talked about it before, I still think it can play a big part in trumping NIL. Will that be the case for every player? Certainly not. Certainly not. But I think it's really easy to stigmatize every college football player when we say, okay, NIL is what every player is chasing these days. No, that is not the case. That is not the case. That is certainly not the case. There's still a lot of players out there that want to be developed because they realize, you know what? Crap, I can make a bag. I can make some money in college, but you know what? The real bag, that's in the NFL. That's playing at the next level. That's being able to get not just that first contract, that second contract, and being able to provide for my family. Because if I'm making a couple thousand here, that's great. It's great. It's college football. It's great. I'm a college kid. Don't have that much money. It's awesome. But at the same time, too, that's not going to be able to take care of you and your family for the rest of your life. And I think Furry, again, having gone through it all, can really sell that part, which is very true. It's not like it's all smoke and mirrors. Sell that vision to those players about the development part.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I mean, Mike, I disagree with there's no such thing as winning the press conference. I think winning the press conferences helps in recruiting, right? I think, it gives, the first initial view, it sets an establishment of just kind of what kind of, at least person you're trying to project. And we're going to agree to disagree there because I think there is winning press conferences, but what does that do for you? Like, I don't hold that up to a certain big standard. Like if somebody wins a press conference, that doesn't really mean anything. But there is some weight to it, right? It's one box you still have to check, right? Because you can have a bad press conference, but no, I think the biggest thing out of Coach Furry that I took away is that he is going to come here to develop players, and he's a better fit than what you had previously. And Coach Coley taking the better opportunity, great. I think Coach Furry fits the dynamic of this program well, where this program is trying to go. The fact that you're building upwards in the SEC, it's a very uphill battle, and you're going to have to do it through development. And Coach Furry stands on his development, right? He stands on the way he brings up players and stuff like that. So I think that's the biggest thing here with this Coach Furry hiring. And I know we talked about it a bunch on the walkthrough as well. So, Mike, again, thanks for coming on my show.
Oh, no problem, Intern Joe. Michael Lynn says it's wild that he recruited Mazio at Limestone. Yeah, you want to talk about someone that aims high. And I've seen this before. I mentioned this. We're going to get into this next part of it. And I think maybe I should play this soundbite first. And then we'll get into some of the things with Mazio as far as aiming high with players, and then we'll wrap up the program on the other side of it. But coming from the Division II ranks, and you can hear it in my question that I bring up with Mike Furry, we've seen this before with coaches going from Division I or coming from Division II and going up to Division I. We've seen it over the last couple of years. It's not anything new and what it teaches you. But I also think in addition from making the jump from D2 up to Division I think there's also something to be said about what Furry had to say about being a head coach and what it can do for you when you make a move like this as far as being an assistant at a program like South Carolina. Let's take a look. And a second one for you. I know it's different in the sense that you're not going from head coach to head coach, but we've seen a lot of Division II coaches in the past 2 decades, whether it be Brian Kelly, Kurt Signetti. They've had success and they've credited what they've learned from the Division II level. What do you think being able, and I know you had 2 stints at Limestone, but what do you think being able to work from the Division II level can help you at this level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's really two things that I've learned that I'm really excited about. One coming from D2 and then one coming from being a head coach. Having an experience as a head coach, to me, allows you to become a great assistant because you learn, you just kind of have an idea what you want your assistants to do, right? Take some burden off you, do your job, right? Keep your office clean, look good, be presentable, get your players ready, get them to study, all those good things. And I think those are things that I'm excited about that I get to do, knowing what his expectations are because of that chair. And then when you talk about coming from D2, you're talking about a 205-man roster that you had to manage. You're talking about my wife actually said this the other day. She's actually excited for me not to take a break, right? Not to take a break, but to be able to focus on one job with 13, 14 players, not 30 jobs with 205. And I think the value of going through all those 30 jobs has taught me the academic side, the financial aid side, how important the scholarship side is, the dormitories, the meal plans, all that good stuff. And so I think there's a lot of knowledge in there that I think helps more towards the recruiting part, understanding that, and obviously building the roster. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that I'll take with me that's grateful that I'll be able to present to our players and continue to make them the best that we possibly can.
So there you go. Mike Furry on Friday talking about making the move up from Division II to coaching in the SEC. Intern Joe's experiencing some technical difficulties on his end, so we're going to wrap this program up without him, most likely, unless he's able to find a way to hop back on. Do want to have some quick comments, though, about that, and we'll wrap up the show. Michael Lynn asks, it's wild that he recruited Mazio Bennett at Limestone, but I like how he aims high. When you look at his coaching staff, and I think this is something that really stands out to me, probably more than most people, from a talent standpoint, what Limestone was before he got there. And I'm not talking about the first stint he had. I'm talking about being able to get back over there the last 2 years and where they were and what they were able to accomplish. They were a program that in the previous, 4 seasons, 18, 19, 20, 21, you had a condensed season in there because of the COVID year. They went 4-30. 4-30. And then he shows up and they go 16-8, 2 straight appearances in the Division II playoffs the last 2 years. So I bring that up because, there's no question that Furry was able to recruit talented players. And it reminds me a lot of what we've seen from some of those guys who I mentioned. Brian Kelly, Kurt Signetti, Bob Chesney, who's at James Madison now. Guys who were at Division II programs, able to have a lot of success, work their way up the ladder. And all 3 of those guys are head coaches. So as Furry was mentioning, he doesn't have to worry about all the responsibilities. He has to worry about the 13, 14, 15 guys in his room coaching from a positional standpoint. But I bring that up because Furry was able to go out there and recruit a lot of talented people, and no disrespect to Gaffney, South Carolina. I don't want the Gaffney people getting upset with me. But if you're not from Gaffney, if you're not from that area, never mind the fact that it's Division II as well, and you're selling this pitch to players to come go play. Hey, come to Gaffney, South Carolina, play for us. Play for this program who I know over the last couple of years, 4-30 combined. Things are going to change, though. That's tough to do. That's tough to do anywhere. But that's what Kurt Signetti was able to do. That's what Bob Chesney was able to do. That's what Brian Kelly was able to do, all from the Division II ranks and working their way up. In addition to that, and this is the part that really stands out to me that I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about. In addition to the talent that he was able to bring in there from a player standpoint, he was also able to bring in multiple coaches who had NFL experience. Jordan Todman, he had an offensive line coach, played in the NFL. Jericho Cotchery, who I know Panther fans remember very well. He's now the head coach of Limestone with all the changes that have gone on with Furry moving over to South Carolina. In addition to being able to bring talented players in there, he was able to convince former NFL players who are not from the area, they're not from Gaffney, to go live in Gaffney, South Carolina, and coach football at Limestone. A program hasn't been around long, but it was not a very good program. And he was able to convince them to come on in, and they did an outstanding job of turning it around under Furry. And now they're going to look to continue to do that now without him, with Cotchery over there as head coach. I bring that up because if Furry can sell that to those coaches, to those players there, obviously the competition picks up when it comes to recruiting, especially when you're in the SEC. But I really think he's going to be able to be one of South Carolina's better recruiters as well, because he's someone that just gets it. He gets it. He understands it. There's certain coaches that you can just tell when you're around them for a short period of time that just get it. He seems like one of those guys that just gets it. And I think he's going to have a lot of success here at South Carolina. All right, folks, before we wrap things up, as we always do, today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Tax season is quickly approaching us, and if you're someone out there that needs to get organized, well, give the folks over at Liberty Tax a call today so you can overcome taxanxiety, so you're not one of those people the very last minute saying, oh, crap, I got to get this done. They'll help you out. But don't wait on it. Give them a call, 803-462-5576. And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage. You see it above my head, and you see it above the head of all of us at Gamecock Central. Anytime you see one of these GC Live shows, if you're in the process of purchasing a home, you understand that trying to find the lowest rate on the market has not been easy, say the last, 2 years. But Clint and his team do an outstanding job. That's why our very own Wes Mitchell, when it was time to purchase a home, he gave Clint a call. That's exactly what former Gamecock quarterback and captain Perry Orth did as well. Give him a call at 803-771-6933 and let Clint know that Gamecock Central sent you. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Talked a lot about different things. I mean, we talked about, obviously, Furry to wrap up the show. We talked about Pro Day that's taking place at South Carolina next Tuesday and the week after. Spring ball starting up for the Gamecocks. We had some combine talk in there as well. A lot of good stuff on today's show. If you missed any of it, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can watch this show in its entirety for free. Or if you're a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network where you could subscribe for free and be able to listen to any of these shows, as well as the appearances on 107.5 The Game for Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Enjoy the rest of your week. Big basketball game tomorrow at Colonial Life Arena. Be sure to pay attention to Gamecock Central between now and then, and hopefully after as well. The Gamecocks look to take down Tennessee and try to do what they can to stick around to be able to get that first place spot in the SEC. We'll worry about all the popsicle headaches later when it comes to tiebreakers, but bottom line, just beat Tennessee tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for watching GC Live Talking Tuesday.